even as mechanical clocks started to appear in larger towns. They were expensive and complex to build. Only important institutions, like churches, universities, or town councils, could afford them. These early clocks often didn't even have dials or hands. Instead, they simply rang a bell every hour. People learned to associate those chimes with parts of the day. For example, if a bell rang 6 times after sunrise, you might know it was mid-morning. These bells structured city life in new ways. Markets opened and closed based on the bell. Workdays started and ended with its sound. But while urban life slowly adjusted to mechanical time, rural areas remained deeply attached to natural rhythms. In small villages, time could be flexible. People would often say things like, "I'll meet you when the sun is high," or "Come by after the evening meal." In fact, many communities had their own ways of measuring time that were rooted in their local environment. Shepherds might track time based on how far their flocks had grazed. Fishermen knew the best times to cast their nets by the movement of the tides and the position of the moon. Interestingly, medieval medicine also relied on time, but in a very different sense. Doctors used astrology and the position of the stars to diagnose illnesses or decide when to perform medical procedures. Certain phases of the moon were believed to be better for bloodletting or surgery. This wasn't timekeeping as we think of it today, but it still shows how people looked to the heavens to guide their actions. Another fascinating aspect of medieval time is how it changed with the seasons. Unlike modern time, which is fixed and equal year-round, medieval hours could stretch or shrink. This system, called temporal hours, divided the daylight period into 12 equal parts. So in summer, an hour might be 75 minutes long, while in winter, it could be only 45 minutes. Nighttime was divided the same way. This made sense to people whose lives were shaped by daylight. After all, there's no point in pretending that a winter afternoon is as long as a summer one. Because of this seasonal variation, telling time required constant observation and adjustment. Monks, who depended heavily on precise timing for prayer, had to update their schedules regularly. Some monasteries even employed a horologist, a kind of early time specialist, whose job was to track the changing daylight and ensure the bells rang at the correct intervals. By the late Middle Ages, particularly in Italian city-states like Venice and Florence, time was becoming increasingly important to commerce. Traders, bankers, and merchants needed more reliable ways to coordinate meetings, track travel, and manage contracts. This demand for precision helped fuel advances in clockmaking. Innovations like the escapement mechanism, which helped regulate the movement of gears, made clocks more accurate and allowed them to eventually gain faces and hands. At the same time, the cultural perception of time was shifting. In earlier centuries, time had been seen as cyclical, governed by the repeating patterns of nature and the church calendar. But by the 14th and 15th centuries, time was becoming linear. People began to think of it as a resource, something that could be gained, lost, saved, or wasted. This transformation laid the foundation for the modern world, where time is money and every second counts. Yet, despite these changes, it's worth remembering that most people throughout the medieval period did not own any personal timekeeping device. The idea of checking the time for yourself, on your wrist, in your pocket, or on your wall, was unthinkable. You were always relying on something external, the sun, the bell, the shadow, or even just your gut feeling. And maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. Time in the medieval world was communal, sensory, and slow. People lived in the present because they had no other choice. Life was measured not by hours and minutes, but by experiences, morning frost, the call to prayer, the angle of the sun, or the toll of a distant bell. In the end, while we may think of medieval timekeeping as primitive or imprecise, it was perfectly adapted to the needs of the world it served. And in some ways, it reminds us that time isn't just something we measure, it's something we live.